Hey, all you wiretappers, Gary Jenkins back here in the studio of Gangland Wire. I am a former Kansas City Police Intelligence Unit detective and now turned podcaster and documented filmmaker. And we record the Mafia, everything we can about the mob. And today I've been wanting to do this story, guys. It's a man named Nicola Gentile. Did I get that right, Gary?
Beautiful.
All right. This is Gary Clemente, and Gary's been on before, or GP Clemente. He's been on before. His father was Peter Clemente, who was one of the original Sicilian-born FBI agents in the United States and did a lot of translation work with Balaci. And he's writing books. So we talked about the first book, but tell just a little bit more about it. And guys, I'll have links to that book. And then tell me a little bit about the two more you have coming out.
The first book that I wrote in a series of books about my father's lengthy FBI career is called Untold Mafia Tales from the FBI Top Hoodlum Squad. And it's about my father's career in the Mafia from 1950 to 1976. And in 1957, he became a part of the Top Hoodlum Squad, which is an elite group that J. Edgar Hoover started as part of the Top Hoodlum program.
Yeah.
And what happened was in 1957, they had a big mafia conclave meeting in Appalachian, New York. And they had about 60 members of the mafia throughout the country. All the bosses that attended this meeting, and it became publicized. The cops were there. They confiscated their identification, their wallets, the money, everything. And it got released into the news. This was a big story. So what happened was J. Edgar Hoover at that time had been denying the existence of the mafia
Yeah.
for a number of reasons, probably because he didn't want to get involved with all of the muck of trying to prosecute these gangland people, because he knew that they had a lot of buffers between the bosses and the guys committing the murders. So he knew it was going to be difficult and it would blemish their conviction record and rate. So he kind of stayed away from it, denied the existence of the mafia. And along comes this Appalachian conclave meeting. It got released into the news, and everybody was up in arms about this. That's when Hoover decided to start the Top Hoodlum program, because there was absolutely no denial of what was going on here, that there was some sort of vast criminal organization that was highly organized, and he had to do something about it. So in 1957, my father became part of the Top Hoodlum program, and in particular the Top Hoodlum Squad in New York City, which is really a hotbed
Yeah.
of mafia criminal activity. You couldn't get any more hotter than what they had there. They had five mafia families alone in New York. And the first book was really about how my father confronted Carlo Gambino, how Carlo Gambino became one of his original subjects for him to study and to profile. He was ordered to do that, and he was happy to do that. The book is really about him confronting face to face with Carlo Gambino, and then afterwards wiretapping him at the Golden Gate Hotel in Miami Beach, Florida. He was on the other side of a wall from Gambino for 6 weeks. Gambino did not know he was on the other side of the wall wiretapping him with another agent. So that's what the first book was about. And the second book is about really the backstory of my father's life before he got into the FBI a little bit.
Oh,
Then his first years in the Bureau, when he was a part of the investigation of the Communist Party and the Socialist Workers Party, and the few offices that he was in, like the Springfield, Illinois office, and also Cleveland. And then he became a part of the New York office. He was still investigating communist activities at the time. And then he became a part of the Top Hoodlum Squad. And his milieu, his wheelhouse, became organized crime and the mafia. So that's generally what has happened so far. The second book is being released this coming month, and it will have book two and book three talking about these sorts of things.
Interesting, interesting. All right, guys, I'll have a link to the old book down there in the show notes and look for that new book coming up, and we'll get back together. I'll get back with Gary after the book comes out sometime, and we'll do another show. And we're not going to talk about the mafia so much. We're going to talk about these activities, which I think is interesting, of the FBI against the Socialist Workers Party and the Communist Party USA, and because they did a lot of work. When I was growing up, Gary, do you remember I Led Three Lives, the TV show? About his last name was Philbrick. It was a weekly TV show about
Yes.
an undercover FBI agent who supposedly was working as a member of the Communist Party and would go to these meetings and things like that. You remember that? I Led Three Lives.
I do remember that. That show goes way, way back. What year was that show?
Oh, that had to be 1953, 54. I had to be like 9, 10 years old. 55, I was 10 years old. So it probably maybe 1955.
I do remember the show. I think I've seen reruns of it.
Yeah, I
Uh,
bet it's on YouTube. I have to look that up for fun one of these days.
Interesting show back then. We will talk about this later on at another time as regards to the second book. But back in the 1950s, J. Edgar Hoover's main enemy was the Communist Party.
Yeah.
It wasn't
Oh, yeah.
organized crime. That was his top focus. He wrote a book called Masters of Deceit. People, I think everybody, they should have this book in the public school system, but they don't want to do that today
No,
because
no.
today's public school system, they try to inculcate youngsters in more social activities and
Yeah.
social warriors and not learning about the perils of Marxism and communism.
Yeah. Okay, today we're going to talk about Nicola Gentile. Now, 1903, he was a Sicilian immigrant that came to the United States, and he found a lot of opportunity among the other Sicilian immigrants because he was a black hander, if you will, when he first got here. He was a criminal who came over from Sicily, but he was able to move among all the different families, all the different cities, and settle disputes and help people get organized and do things like that. So Gary, start telling us a little bit about what you remember about Nicola Gentile.
First of all, I want to tell people that Nicola Gentile he was an uber Giovalaci. He was Giovalaci on steroids. He is somebody later on in his life, toward the end of his life, he wrote his memoirs down.
Yeah,
And this was in 1963. So what happened was he published his memoirs in Italy. Okay, he had a co-author, he had another journalist write these memoirs down in Sicilian. Okay,
yeah.
these memoirs were then grabbed by the FBI and they were given to my father.
Uh,
My father had the papers written in Sicilian. And I remember as a boy in 1963, when this happened, my father was sitting at a table translating these memoirs with my grandmother. Now, my grandmother grew up not too far away. My grandmother and my grandfather grew up not too far away from Nicola Gentile. And Nicola was born in the town of Siculiana. Try to say that, Gary. That's a tough one.
I give.
Try to say that one real fast. So he's
Yeah,
writing translating the memoirs with my Sicilian-speaking grandmother and grandfather. Now, my grandfather my grandparents, my father spoke Sicilian as well too. He grew up with that as a little boy, but my grandmother and my grandfather were helping him translate
yeah.
these papers. These are the FBI papers. This is a
Uh,
copy. This is a copy of the FBI photocopy after it got translated. And my father did write some notes here and there. You can see it's fairly light. The print is fairly light on it. I do have some
yeah.
post-it notes or notations, comments on it. But this is about 185 pages that were translated. And the the language is quite formal. Okay. I'll read to you. I'll read to you a little bit of the first page of
Okay.
what Nicola
And,
Gentile wrote as he
and
started off.
before you get started, there was that book ever translated? Is that available here in English form, like on Amazon, as a book you can buy today? I know a lot of people are wondering, can I find that translate?
That's a good question. I haven't gone that far yet.
Okay, all right.
I don't know.
I'll take a look on
That is a good
Amazon.
question. But This is the translation that my father and my grandparents did.
Yeah.
And whether it came out that way in these books that are out now, I don't know. There are some books that do talk about Nicola Gentile, but I don't know if there are any English translation books. So this is how the first page of Nicola's book opens. Siculiana, a small town of Sicily, did not, prior to 1900, offer any opportunity for work or secondary school education for the betterment of life of its youth, the greater portion of whom, in which there existed the disposition, encouraged by the family while still young, frequented the shop of an artisan where they struggled to learn a trade, but at the same time often neglecting school so that illiteracy reigned supreme. So that's the sort of language that Nicola used in it. And it's quite interesting. It's a bit formal. He does jump around a bit from his activities from one place to another. He talks a lot about how he knew practically everybody in the mob at that time. He knew people like Luciano. He interacted with Al Capone. He interacted with Vito Genovese. He interacted with Albert the Mad Hatter and Anastasia. These were all the big shots. I'm talking about in the 1920s through the 1930s and all the way after. If you remember that in the 1920s and 1919, Prohibition happened. Okay,
Yeah.
that's what really blew up out of everything, the prestige, the money, and the power of the mafia. That's how it grew because of Prohibition, and they were able to bootleg liquor. And Nicola was indeed a part of this.
He traveled around a lot. Now, what was the deal with that? He was in New York. I think that was his base, and that's where he got started. But he traveled to, I think, New Orleans, or did he come up from New Orleans? I can't remember. He was in Kansas City. He was in Cleveland. He was in Pueblo, Colorado. He made some connections. There's a really old, early family in Pueblo, Colorado. I've talked to a descendant of that family, and I've talked to another author that knew quite a little bit about it. So he traveled around to these different families. What was the story with that?
He was for whatever reason, he was a roving, we'll call it ambassador and a mediator. Look, you're talking about organized crime. You're talking about the mafia. You're talking about vicious people who had one thing and one thing only in mind. What was it? Duh, money,
Yeah.
money and power. And because of that, you're going to have disputes. You're going to have arguments. You're going to have people being killed as a result of it. And Gentile was the sort of individual that think of Nicola Gentile as a Vito Corleone. Think of him as a godfather figure, very wise, understanding how to mediate the disputes, realizing that, as everybody else did, that if we do not mediate these disputes, what will happen? We will be at each other's throats like animals.
Yeah. Yeah.
And our organization cannot exist. Our universe, our world cannot exist if this happens. So we must mediate these disputes, and we must have an organizational structure. We must have a boss. We must have an underboss. We must have a consigliere, an advisor who gives words of wisdom about how to proceed with business, whether to take somebody out, how to proceed in such a fashion. So all of that was a part of the world, and it existed for many years, for many decades because of that. Now, let me start off a little bit to tell you the beginnings of Nicola so we can lead up to how he got to this position. So he was born in 1884. He came to America at the age of 19. He went to New York. He travels to Kansas City to meet with his brother Vincent, who lived in Topeka, Kansas,
Oh,
not too
golly.
far away from Kansas City. He started working out in the Santa Fe Railroad, and he became a linen peddler. And he did make some money doing that. He returned to Italy in 1909. He married in 1910 and had a daughter named Maria. Now, in his papers, you really don't hear anything more about that happening. You don't hear anything about his wife, children, nothing.
Yeah.
And it isn't until later on, at the very end of his memoirs, he talks about the women in his life.
Huh.
And we'll get to that later. But so what happened was he returns back from Italy, he gets back to America, and he goes to Canada. Then he moves to San Francisco with his brother, and he continues to sell linen until 1914. And it isn't until he was a year or two later, maybe about the age of 19, 20 or so, he starts getting involved with the Honor Society. Now, he knows about the Honor Society from back in Sicily. He's been well aware of it. He's been involved with it. At the age of 15, he had been convicted of a crime, and he had been sentenced to jail at the age of 15. So he wasn't new to the world of organized crime. He knew it back in Sicily. It was a very deep fabric of the world of Sicily at that time. And why is that? Because in Sicily, in those years in the late 1800s, you had either what? You had sort of a feudal system where people were working for these large landowners, and the landowners were absentee landowners. Okay, they delegated authority to people underneath them, and the people working for their land and working on their land were really persona non grata. A lot of poverty happened because of it. So to bridge that sort of gap with poverty, the mafia started. In other words, they call it the honor society. These were men of honor. And Nicola Gentile describes it as let me see here. He describes the honor society originating many years ago in antiquity, and it gives the right to defend the honor of the weak and to respect human law.
Mm.
With these principles as its guide, it's still operated within the mafia. So you understand that within the honor society, here's the code that we must be civilized, even though we're acting like animals. Okay? We don't want to act too much like animals, or otherwise we will destroy the golden goose. Okay? So this is what they put in the back of their minds. We must act in a civilized manner. Okay? So that was he understood the understanding of how the honor society worked. So he went to New York, he went to Brooklyn, and at that time, the mafia probably had 2,000 members of the mafia in New York at that time between the five families. And they call them Bocate families. Okay, so he joined the honor society in Pittsburgh. And soon after, he was asked by Gregorio Conti, the head of the mob boss in Pittsburgh, to do a killing for him. Okay. Now he doesn't say whether this was an initiation rite, because that's what they usually did in the mafia. You had to kill somebody in order to be initiated into the mafia, become a member of it. So he was ordered to do a killing, and what happened was they confronted this individual in front of a restaurant. His brother shoots the victim in front of the restaurant. He runs away before Nicola empties his gun into the guy. When Paul runs away, Nicola's standing there with this gun. People are yelling and screaming, "Oh my gosh, he did it. He killed this person." Paul is running down the street. He takes his firearm, he shoots it up in the air. Boom, boom. Scares the crowd away. Nicola runs away. He escapes from that scene. Now, Nicola really has never, throughout his mafia career, he's never been arrested. It isn't until later on in his life that he actually does get under the eye of the police, and he becomes indicted and will get arrested. So that's what happens to him later on. But later, during his life in the mob, he does not get arrested in any way, shape, or form. Although he gone to Italy, when he goes back to Italy, what he he was under the scrutiny of the police there, and he had been arrested. He gets out on bail, and he was accused of crimes there. So he was pretty slippery. But in terms of what we're talking about, his mediation skills, little by little, he becomes this sort of individual that people look at as somebody that can mediate their problems and to tamper down the situation that can become very hot. And he became somebody that the other mobsters called. They call him Uncle Nick or Zio Nicola, Zio Cola, Uncle Cola. They saw him as this sort of a avuncular figure
Interesting.
that could ameliorate these disputes and these situations that they were involved with.
In Kansas City, our mob boss was Nick Sabella for a long time, and I was looking over some wiretaps, and people were talking about him. And the third, and one of his underlings was talking to another underling about something he was going to take to him, and he was called him Zio the whole time. They always referred to him as Zio, so that's a term of honor and respect throughout mafia world.
That's right. As I keep saying, the mafia was able to exist for as long as it did because they had an organizational structure
Yeah,
and they had a code of honor that kept them from not acting like wild animals too much.
yeah,
Too much. A lot of these people, if you've met more than your share of criminals, Gary, you know how many of these people can be. Some of them can be very businesslike. Some of
yeah,
them can be very, very vicious, sick people too. The Greg Scarpers of the world that would kill dozens of people. These were psychopaths.
yeah,
So you had your whole range. You had your whole range of people. And the fascinating thing about Gentile was that he knew a lot of these individuals. You talked about the Kansas City entity. Yes, Pueblo, Colorado did have its problems at that time, and somebody had been killed at the Pueblo, Colorado family, and that sort of spilled over into Kansas City. Kansas City was asked to mediate the situation, and it was Chile mediated the situation. As because of it, Gentile became the boss of the Kansas City family. Now he does not get into this in great depth about what he did in Kansas City at Boston, but it was a temporary thing. He was bopping around from Pittsburgh to Cleveland to Kansas City. He went to New York. He was in Boston, as far away as San Francisco and Los Angeles. He was all over the place, and he was very well respected. He had a lot to do with what was going on in Chicago with Al Capone. Interestingly enough, Al Capone at that time, when Gentile encountered him, his family, if you want to call it, his crime family, had a lot of international entities in it.
yeah,
It wasn't an Italian thing.
yeah,
He had a lot of different people from different ethnic backgrounds as a part of his organization. It wasn't until Nicola comes around and the mafia bosses came around and told him, look, this is what the mafia is like. We're not an international group here.
yeah,
It's strictly Italian. You want to be a part of it, you need to buy into this. Okay? And that's indeed what he did, bought into the mafia, marginalized the people that were not Italians, booted them out and or killed them sometimes, and started his own mafia Italian thing in Chicago, which became very well known as a bloody place to be, bloody place to be, because of the killings that they had prior to him being a part of the mafia officially. There were a tremendous amount of gangland killings, as you know, in Chicago.
yeah.
So he had a large part to, and
He did keep a lot of those other ethnicities around as players, as people he could use, though, and on into Frank Nitty's time and on up into modern times, up into the 50s and 60s. They had several people that were on the periphery would be associates, but I guess he had more organization of Sicilians, it looks to me like, over the years.
yes, he did. The what happened? Excuse me. What happened eventually was, as Gary, the Castellammarese War erupted in the 1930s,
Yeah.
That's another hard one to say, Castellammarese.
Castellammarese. I can say that, Castellammarese.
Try to say that real fast. So what happened? The Castellammarese War erupted, and Joe the Boss Masseria was the boss of bosses. They called him the king. Was the boss of the capi di tutti capi, the boss of bosses. Okay, and Masseria was wielding a very heavy hand that a lot of the other bosses in the country did not like at that time, and in particular, Maranzano became his chief foe. And he was originally from the Castellamare area of Sicily, okay? And his henchmen, his crew, the men around him were from that area. So they had a big war with Gil de Paz Mazzaria. They wanted to assume power. A lot of people were dying. They were dropping like flies, especially over in New York. And Gentile, Nicola Gentile, was one of the people that were trying to mediate this situation between Masseria and Maranzano. Originally, Nicola sided with Masseria, but then as the ties change and turn, everybody wanted Masseria dead. All the other bosses wanted him dead, including Capone. Masseria was eventually executed in, I believe it was 1931. And so Salvatore Maranzano assumes power, okay? The people that Masseria had underneath him, Maranzano said, we need to get rid of these guys. So he wanted killing all of the Masseria boys. So everybody was saying, look, I don't see any end of this bloodshed. We don't need this publicity, okay? We need to operate in the shadows, okay? Yeah. And Carlo Gambino was an expert at doing that. So what happened was the war ended. Maranzano took over. He kills the boys, but then after that, Maranzano, what happens? Power gets to his head. Uneasy lies the crown of the king.
Yeah.
Maranzano eventually gets killed by the other bosses, and it was Vito Genovese. It was Vito Genovese that was ordered to do the hit on Maranzano with his crew. And as a result of that, Gary, the other bosses said, look, we need more structure here, but there's too much bloodshed. We can't have this going on forever and ever. So they created a commission. And the commission, now they did have other commissions before. They did have general assemblies, like that. And so they created a commission that included Lucky Luciano, included Al Capone, it included Joe Profaci, included Joe Bonanno, Joe Bananas, as part of the commission to settle things down. Now, I said that originally, before when we started that they had an Appalachian conclave, right? They had about 60 bosses, 60, 80 bosses there at that conclave. That's big. Believe it or not, while the big war was going on, Al Capone had a meeting on his dime in Boston, I believe. Guess who was there? I'm talking about 500. They had 500 mafia guys there, and there was no publicity about it. Not what happened later on in Appalachian, New York. So here you imagine 500 mob guys meeting at a hotel in Boston, and it wasn't covered by the media at that time. So
Yeah.
that's part and parcel of what Nicola was involved with, some of the people he was involved with at that time.
So what happens to him later on? What stirs him to write this book?
What happened was toward the latter part of his life, he starts to talk about a couple of women that he was involved with. And he talks about, I will pull up the paperwork so you can actually hear the words that he talks about. He talks about how he met this woman named Maria. He meets this woman named Maria, and he really captures his imagination. He doesn't talk about that he had been married, that he also had a child too. He had a child named Maria. So he meets this woman named Maria, and she's really stricken with him. and to the point where she tells him that she's so smitten with him that I'm going to read what he tried to pose as a jewelry salesman so that he can meet her. And he says, "I suspected that you weren't a jewelry salesman." And she says to him, she said, "You did," she whispered in my ear, lightly touching my earlobe with her lips. She used to finish by kissing me on the mouth wild with love. There were moments of passion that our bodies would entwine, palpitating with love, and which would later be abandoned with languid repose. So that's the sort of language he used. And at one point, he talks about how he liked going to her apartment to visit her when he was feeling edgy,
Yeah.
and you're a mobster, you feel a little bit edgy. You're always
Yeah.
looking over your shoulder, right? So he was happy to go to her apartment to calm down, and she would talk to him. And she was, "Mary was happy to see me. She used to tell me, 'Nick,' that's how she called me, 'you are an extraordinary man. You don't know with what fear and respect those boors, the Shakatani, speak of you.'" The Shakatani were the people of Shaka, Sicily, that were mobsters that he associated with. Says, "Your name impresses everyone. Any woman alive brought to live among this rabble would be happy to be your co-worker, to wear men's clothes, and at the necessary time of the occasion should present itself, to embrace a Tommy gun and die in your arms." So that's
Wow.
the sort of romantic verbiage that they would use at the time. So what happened too was he sees her, then eventually he meets another woman named Dorothy. And she professes herself to be Irish to begin with, but then he finds out later on, she tells him, "I'm actually not Irish. I come from a Sicilian family." But she just wanted to impress him somehow to get his eye. She was very attracted to him, to this woman, Dorothy. What happened was they have a love affair. They're seeing each other, and Nicola, this is toward the very end of his story here. Nicola starts to get he had been involved with a gambling house in New York, and the gambling house was starting to go underwater. He needed money, so it was proposed to him by another mobster by the name of Giacomo to do some narcotics trafficking down in Texas and Louisiana. He gets the permission to do so from his bosses. And look, Nicola was still a roving asset, and he had to get permission to do things so that he could acquire enough money for investment, so he could give them money back, so he gets permission to do this. He starts getting involved with the drug trafficking trade in Texas and Louisiana, and he sees that he's being tailed a lot. He doesn't understand why. He said, out of nowhere, the police would show up. And how did they find out? Well, at the same time, he was trying to contact Dorothy. And before he left, Dorothy asked him, "Will I be seeing you much?" He said, "I don't know. I could be gone 6 months to a year." She says that she's so heartbroken about this. And he leaves and he gets involved with the drug trade. And he's asking these questions about how is it that the cops are showing up at these different places where we are trying to transact business. What happens was he tried to contact Dorothy at different places where she said that she could be contacted. She didn't get back to him. So he puts two and two together. So he believes that Dorothy was actually a treasury agent. She had been spying on him, that she was the Matahari, so to speak,
Yeah.
and was feeding the information to the feds as to where he was. So what happened was they indicted him. He got out on bail on $18,000 bail, and he was urged to be a stowaway to get to Italy. So he stows away on a ship, gets back to Italy. And interestingly enough, Gary, he starts at World War II erupts, and he becomes an asset to the Allies in Sicily. He's giving them intelligence about what's happening in Sicily with the mafia in Sicily, and the mafia in Sicily did not want to have anything to do with Mussolini. Mussolini was trying to bag on them big time. He's trying to shut them down. And Nicola helped the Allies with intelligence reports on what was going on in Sicily, and that was a big part of what he was doing. And then later on, it wasn't until the 1963 or so, and he was still getting involved. He was still getting involved with the mafia at that time, doing criminal activities, but he wasn't welcomed as much as he had been before. But he was still involved with them. What happened was the 60s came around, and he started writing his memoirs. He was an older man, and he started writing these things down on paper, which is what a mafia member does not do. You do not speak a word, let alone try to write it on paper, otherwise for penalty of death. So he wrote all of these memoirs down in 1963. It got published, then he was sentenced to death. But one of the mafia families in Sicily refused to do it. They refused to do it because he had a lot of respect. Members of the mafia in the U.S. and also in Sicily respected Nicola Gentile very much because he had this Godfather air about him. He had the Vito Corleone air about him. I will talk to you, and I will come up with a solution for you. And everybody's calmed down by that. They're not so excited and bloodthirsty when they hear that. So they sentence him to death. The mafia family in Sicily refused to carry out the hit. The book was published, and he lived the rest of his life in peace. He died peacefully as an old man in Sicily in 1970.
Wow, 1970. That's a hell of a story. That is a hell of a story, man.
I'm telling you, you can make a movie out of this man's life.
Oh, yeah.
Literally, the way he was jumping around from one place to the other. He was really a maverick, rogue sort of individual who did not have a higher education about him, but was extremely intelligent and was able to use this. And that's why they respected him. A lot of these individuals that he dealt with were bores and uneducated individuals to begin with. Many of them they were highly intelligent. And as my dad always told me, he says, son, these individuals, that were, especially the mob bosses, they could have been tycoons of finance. They could have been industrial tycoons, wizards of finance and economics and Wall Street if they had wanted to, but they did not want to. So they chose a life of crime.
Interesting. I'll tell you what, that's a hell of a story, Gary. That is a really cool story. I'd always wanted to do this guy's story, and mainly because I knew of his Kansas City connection. Talked to our local FBI agent here that has chronicled a lot of these things, got a book out there about those early days, and he's excited. He's looking forward to listening to this. So I really appreciate you coming on the show. Gary Clemente, GP Clemente. His father was Peter Clemente, the first Sicilian-born member of the FBI top hoodlum squad, and Gary has been translating his works, what he did. He wrote down a lot of stuff, and Gary's been translating. He's putting it down to a series of books. It's called, it is Untold Mafia Tales from the FBI Top Hoodlum Squad, I believe. I think I can read that on your event there. He does speaking events, too. If you're back east, you're from New York City area. Where are you from? Where do you speak at?
I originally grew up in New Jersey, not too far from all of the Sopranos guys. In New Jersey, my father was working at the New York office at that time and decided to buy a home in the suburbs of New York, not too far away from New York City. So that's where I grew up.
So
on the right side of the track.
If somebody wants to get hold of you to do a speaking engagement, though, how do they find you?
They can get a hold of me at my email, gpclementebooks, gpclementebooks @gmail.com. And I'm also on X, GP Clemente. 2016. I'm also on X, and the book is available on Amazon. You can pick it up there, and it's doing quite well.
Great,
Looking forward
great.
to the next one coming out next month.
Yeah, I bet you're looking forward to that. Yeah, and if you get his book, be sure and give him a review. Give him a good review on whatever review you want to give, but give him a good review.
Please.
Please. Because it helps these guys a lot to get a good review. More people will buy their book. And we all want to encourage these mob historians. And Gary has done a real great job at chronicling the history, not just the blood and guts. We all like the blood and guts stories and the murder stories, but the entire history. And you were talking about them being out in Pueblo, Colorado, and I couldn't figure that out. I stuck to a woman whose our ancestors were in Pueblo, Colorado, connected to the mob out there. And she said that what it is, there was lead mines out there, and a lot of Sicilians were miners, and they went to that southern Colorado area to work in the mines. And I know we have a large group of Sicilian populations in southwest Missouri where there were strip mines down there for coal. And it's a huge family of them down there. And so it's, where the work was is where people went to. And that's how they ended up spread around the country.
That's right. That's right. There were many Sicilians in San Francisco, Louisiana. Believe it or not, what Sicilians were in Louisiana when they first immigrated to Louisiana, there were several of them that had been hung.
Yeah.
They
Oh,
were
yeah.
hung because they were looked upon as less than human,
Yeah.
and the locals did not want them infiltrating their population. So it didn't just happen to African Americans; it also
No,
happened to
no,
Sicilians.
yeah, I've read about that story. So and it's the immigrant experience. Any group of immigrants that comes to the United States at first, the greater population, the English and the Irish and the Germans already have the good jobs and they keep them pushed out. And they have a different language, totally different language, and everybody else is speaking English. And so it's really hard for an immigrant population to move in. That's why they have to start businesses. And along with them, they brought the mafia. They had brought this tradition of the mafia that is shadow government, if you will, for them.
Well, that's true. And I must add that even though I talk a lot about the mafia and the world of the mafia, the Cosa Nostra, that my father was involved with, my father would be the first to tell you he was not proud of the criminal association
Yeah.
and organization that these people started. He was not proud of it in any way, shape, or form. In fact, if you read my first book, you will read the part about how my father confronted Carlo Gambino and told him to his face
Mm.
that he was not proud of what Gambino and his associates were doing and the bad name that they were bringing upon other Italian and Sicilians that had come to this country, like my grandparents, that worked hard and made something of themselves. It's not something to be proud of. Fascinating, interesting,
Yeah.
but it's not something that I'm certainly not proud of either. But pretty amazing considering these people could have done something more honest, but they chose not to. That's a whole other story and movie to talk about.
Yeah, it is. Gary Clemente, I really appreciate you coming on the show. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Gary. Great being here. No, Gary to Gary.
Gary to Gary, yeah. They don't name Gary anymore. Little kids Gary anymore. That was back right after the war in the early 50s. Everybody was named Gary. I had 3 Garys, I think, in my class.
I tell you, I went to this movie with my grandkids. It's called Zootopia,
Yeah, oh, yeah.
and they had
I've heard of that.
and they had a character in there called Gary the Snake.
I
So
bet that's
that's what we've devolved down to.
yeah, down to the snake.
We're nothing but snakes, Gary.
Guys, I really appreciate y'all tuning in, and don't forget to like and subscribe. And down in the show notes, I'm gonna have links to this stuff, and I've got links to some of the stuff that I sell, my books and DVDs. If you want to rent them, I got a link to that. You can rent my DVDs for $1.99. So thanks a lot, guys. Okay, Gary, thank you.
Hey, thank you, Gary. Thank you very much. Really appreciate that you having me on. Really
All
enjoy
right.
it.
All
You're
right,
the
yeah.
best. Anything I can do for you, please let me know.
I
Anything
will.
I can do.
I will.
You know that I've got your endorsement on the back of the book, right?
I didn't remember. I do so much sometimes, Gary, that I forget all what I do. Good.
Yeah, I've got your endorsement on the
I
back of
gave
the
you a
book.
good endorsement. All right.
And the second book, one that's coming out, The one that's
You got
coming
some
out will
author
have the
blurbs?
same thing on there.
You got some author blurbs? You got enough author blurbs on there?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, good.
Your endorsement will be on the back of the next book
Okay,
too.
all right, all right, all right, Gary. Thanks a lot, my friend.
Hey,
And
thank you, buddy.
anything in
But when
Kansas
that
City,
book comes out, I'll let you know.
yeah, let me know. We'll do that show here in a couple of months. Okay?
Hey, thank you very much.
All
Appreciate
right,
it.
all right, all right. Stay safe.
Okay, buddy. Take care.
Bye.
Bye bye.